How's it going, people? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking you through the story of my first car, my Skoda Fabia Estate from 2004 with a 1.2 litre 64 brake horsepower engine. Now, normally you'd be seeing my face right about now, but I've decided that because this is a story about my first car, I thought I'd give you some footage of me driving my most recent car, my Mazda MX-5. So sit back, relax, enjoy me driving my MX-5, and let's get into the story of how this car was the best first car I could have ever owned. So on the 26th of February 2014, I passed my driving test. I got 2 minors, one for stalling during my 3-point turn and one for driving over a curb to get out of a sticky situation. So I spent all of March searching for a car and for insurance and all that kind of stuff. And I basically came across the same issue that most young people have, which is it's ridiculously difficult to get any kind of cheap insurance on your first car. Of course, every young person dreams of having an absolutely amazing first car, and it's just not feasible when prices are that ridiculous for insurance. I even found that insurance prices were different if I had different names in the quotes. They were cheaper if they used my nickname, which was Johnny, and they were more expensive if they used my real name, which is Jonathan. And to me that makes no sense, because I feel like Johnny's a more up to no good name than Jonathan, but whatever. So obviously, as it was 2014, I was in upper 6th at school, and I had a weekend job working at John Lewis. I was actually in ladies' shoes, so I know everything there is to know about women's shoes and accessories and all that great stuff. And I distinctly remember being at work one day in the bathrooms looking on eBay at so many different cars, and I'd come to the conclusion that this Skoda Fabia Estate in green was absolutely going to be mine. It was a bid with no reserve, and I went for £400 and no one else even bid on the car, and I just won it whilst I was sitting there at work, and I was a bit like, uh-oh, now I have to go all the way to Hull to collect this car that I don't even know if it drives or not, that I just bought for £400. And at the time, £400 was like pretty much all I was earning per month. Fortunately, my dad went to collect it with some trade plates, drove it back home, and said the engine was really strong. It only had like 64,000 miles on the clock, so it really wasn't that bad. And I only got the car so cheap because some builders had taken it as part payment for a job they did. So it arrived on my driveway on the 3rd of April 2014, and I got 6 months of insurance with the booster insurance program from Ensley. I think it's no longer a thing, but at the time it was £1,000 for like 6 months, and it gave you a 1 year's no claim straight up. That fit my situation perfectly because it meant that I would have 6 months to drive the car throughout the final bits of school, and then my insurance would run out just as I went to university. When the car arrived, it absolutely stank of dog. The former owner must have run a kennel because it took absolutely ages to get rid of the smell of dog from that car. It also had no hubcaps, was very badly scratched, and had multiple different shades of green around the car. But irrespective of those issues and the fact that it was a granddad car, I immediately fell in love with it and named the car Skye, also known as the Phatmobile. There wasn't really much method to my madness behind buying this car. It was simply because it was cheap, and it had cheap insurance, and it was right place, right time. I still remember my first drive in the car. I drove to the shops close to mine, I stalled the car, nearly crashed the car, but I absolutely loved driving it. It's that really good feeling of suddenly driving a car that you own rather than the car that's owned by your driving instructor. Immediately, the best thing about that car straight away was its size. I was really into BMXing and dirt jumps and all that kind of stuff with my mates at the time, and so we would basically chuck about 3 or 4 bikes into the back of the car at any one time and drive them to the dirt jumps or whatever. It meant that we could go to better skate parks and better jumps and all sorts of cool stuff. I still remember this time I had this one massive crash, i.e. this one.
Mate, you're right.
Yeah, I'm good.
You okay?
My face okay?
No, the moneymaker's broke.
Oh man.
Mate, that was like one of mine. Checking his face. Make sure it's not being mashed up by the jump. Oh, what's that? Oh, we got a little cut there. Oh, what's he gonna do?
And the next thing I remember, I was in my shower, so I had basically knocked myself completely silly, somehow driven the car home while severely concussed, and I have absolutely no memory of it. Drove my friend home, packed all the bikes into the cars, all that kind of stuff. Seems pretty ridiculous looking back on it. Of course, the car got some abuse for being a granddad car from my friends, but it was just so useful that ultimately ended up being like the ideal car from getting me and my mates from A to B. So as I mentioned, my 6 months of insurance ran out in September when I went to university for my first year, so my grandparents kindly offered to let me sit the car on their drive, and the car basically sat there for 9 months. It was switched on a few times, but other other than that, it didn't really do any driving at all. As I was on campus at university for first year, there was absolutely no need for a car, so no point wasting money on insurance. Funny how these things go full circle, by the way, because now my MX-5 is sitting on my grandparents' drive whilst I buy all the bits to do the project on it. But anyway, when I returned for the summer holidays, I finally had the chance to drive the car again. And I had 1 year's no claims. I really enjoyed driving, so I barely ever drank at parties because I always wanted to be the designated driver and just drive my car to and from. But I remember there was this one particularly fun story from that summer where I was driving the car home from a sporting event that I had gone to with the girl I was dating at the time, and she was in a bad mood with me, having a go at me in the passenger seat because I hadn't been watching her do the sport or whatever. I can't really remember at this point. But basically, during the drive, whilst going up quite a steep hill, my coil pack went, and I didn't know it was my coil pack. I just suddenly felt that my car was significantly down on power and just basically not as responsive. So my attention completely shifted from getting told off to caring exclusively about my car. And as you can imagine, that didn't go down very well. Fortunately, my dad's a car mechanic, so fixed the car when I got home. But either way, still a funny story to look back on. Another thing that happened to the car that summer was that suddenly, for seemingly no reason, the car started to lose more and more power every single day, and I really couldn't understand what was going on with it. It would honestly take about 40 to 50 seconds to get to 60 miles per hour. I gave the car to my dad and he had a look around, and he really couldn't understand it either until suddenly he opened up the catalytic converter and saw that it had completely packed up and exhaust gases were no longer escaping from the car. So as it had gotten more and more backed up, the car had gotten slower and slower and slower. To fix it, rather than just buying a whole new cat, he just decatted the car, and so basically I had a straight piped Skoda Fabia estate. I would assume it's one of the very few straight piped ones in the world. So then of course I'd locked myself into a whole year of insurance, and I was going to university to live out of campus this time. So I drove pretty much 3/4 of my bedroom down in my car to university. I could have probably taken everything in my car, but my grandparents came as well, so we just shared some of the load. It was honestly the absolute ideal car for it. It never really lost grunt, even though you filled the car with PCs and gaming stuff and TVs and all the kind of nonsense you wanted to fill it with. It would still just carry on pulling. So I went to the University of Bath, and I lived in Oldfield Park where most of the students do, and if you've ever been there, you'll realise that it's very difficult to find a parking space. So in that year, I honestly perfected my parallel parking skills. Even though the car was quite big, I could literally get it into any space. Even if the space was as big as the car, I bet I could have gotten it into it. I literally backed myself so hard at parallel parking, I changed my Tinder bio to ridiculously good at parallel parking. And it actually worked as well. Like, I always used to get responses from girls that were like, "Ooh, I can't parallel park, but I can bay park, ha 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 ha." And cringy as it may seem, at least they were sending the first message. I wasted a lot of money this year at uni just because I liked driving so much and liked having all the boys and all the girls in the car. Driving up to and from uni cost an absolute arm and a leg in terms of parking on campus, but I still just did it all the time for some reason. I should have taken the bus, but I liked driving, so I just wasted all my money. And at the end of the year, I had one particularly good story. So I live in London, about 120 miles away from Bath, and I'd gone home just for a day to kind of meet some friends in London and that kind of stuff. My mates from uni were all going out that evening on the sesh, and I really fancied this one girl who was part of our group, and I knew I wanted to get back in time to make sure that I was there to sesh and to chirps. In order to get back in time, I had to absolutely book it from my house in London all the way through to Bath. I did the 120 miles in about an hour and 45 minutes, which was pretty sick considering the suggested time is about 2 hours to 2 hours and 20 minutes. That was my PB, and I was very proud of it, and I'm pretty sure I won't beat it for quite a long time simply because of all the roadworks on the M4. Needless to say, I made it for the sesh, and the girl that I fancied is now my girlfriend, and has been for more than 3 years now. And I only have Skye the Skoda to thank for that. So at the end of my second year of university, I actually managed to pack everything I owned into that car, which is an unbelievable feat. Granted, it was literally completely full to the point at which you could only fit one person into the car, the driver. I was still very, very impressed. So I remember a couple of days after I finished my second year of university, I was about 1.5 miles from my house. In the car along, no biggie, and next thing I know, I hear this really horrible sound. It was like a thudding noise from the engine. I limped the car home to find out that I had absolutely no oil in it. Somehow I just forgot to put oil in it, and that car used to absolutely drink through it. So yeah, a complete omission on my part, and I had to get my mate to cycle to the local Tesco's to buy me some more oil. Oh, and one story I missed actually, just before I finished university for second year, my dad had to come down and fix the car because one of the engine bolts had completely sheared out of the car. So not a job that you could do on your own, you'd have to have someone to actually extract the bolt from it. Fortunately, he sorted me out. And so my third year of university, I spent back in London doing a placement, so I very boringly just used the car to commute to and from the station. And the car did have a couple of problems over over that year. So one of them was that the passenger door stopped opening, which was really, really annoying. You could fiddle around with it and try and make it open, but loads of the time people just sat in the back of the car because it was so annoying. Another problem that happened was that suddenly when decelerating, it used to have the biggest backfires. You see people with their pops and bangs maps, they are nothing on how big this car would backfire out of the back. People behind me would actually get scared of the fact that the car was backfiring so loud. But the car still ran absolutely fine, so it's just showing a little bit of its age. If you watched one of my previous videos, I drove the car 2,536 miles around Europe, which was absolutely amazing, and it was just the best car for the trip. Go watch that video if you want to hear another story about this car. Highlight from that is the fact that I drove the car around the Nürburgring, and then just after that holiday on a sad day in September, just before I was going back to university, the brakes failed and I ended up in some bushes. I've also got a video on the full story of how that happened, and it also shows you my lap around the Nürburgring, so if you want to see both of those things at once, click the iCard. So yes, it was very clear that the car was finished. There was no more of the Skoda for me. And my friends will tell you that I'm not a very emotional person, but losing my car really affects me way more than I expected it to. I think it's the only time I've properly cried between 2011 and now, which is just ridiculous. I remember just weeping in my car as I took a whole bunch of memories from it, like the number plates that you sometimes see in the back of my videos, etc. It's really crazy how attached people can come to inanimate objects. But yes, it's the story of my first car in 10 minutes. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this or watching it if you've been looking at me driving this MX-5 around. Within that there are a whole bunch of stories, but I'm saving those for when Vinwiki give me a call and say that they want me on the channel to talk about my amazing first car. Massive thank you to my patrons as always. Remember to like, comment and subscribe, but as always thank you very much for watching and I'll see you in the next one.
Listen.